Making a movie is a long and arduous process that will inevitably see changes and amendments from the start to finish. And the action genre is no different. It is impossible to put everything written or filmed into the final product, and so from there we get the deleted scenes. And who doesn't love to watch them? Obviously, the content of these scenes were cut from the final product for a reason, so they can't always be taken as canon. But even in spite of this, they can add that bit more context to make sense of a scene that left you with a few too many questions the first time round. With that in mind, I'm Adam from Whatculture, and here are 10 deleted scenes that explain confusing action movie moments. Number 10. Thors Bath, Avengers Age of Ultron. There's a quite infamous scene in Avengers Age of Ultron, just after the team retreats to meet Hawkeye's lovely wife and kids. Thor, still reeling from having Wanda play with his brain, heads out and takes Selvig along to essentially have a bath that pointed him in the direction of the Infinity Stones. It's an odd scene because it makes absolutely no sense, has no place in the movie, and yet is incredibly important to Thor as a character. This is what set up his entire arc going into Thor Ragnarok, and was a precursor to Avengers Infinity War on the whole. The issue is that the scene was just too vague. There was a bit of splashing around, and then Thor had a vision that showed him the 4 Infinity Stones already seen by audiences with little to no context. There is a deleted scene, however, that was approached slightly differently. What was kept out of the final product was Thor actually being possessed by the Norn, and being questioned directly by Selvig. This gave a lot more context, and explained much more clearly what fans were actually looking at. The problem is that it was just too weird, and as much as the theatrical scene didn't really have a place in the movie, neither did this one. Number 9. Nero's 20-year hiatus, Star Trek. The Star Trek universe changed forever in 2009 with the release of J.J. Abrams' blockbuster. The movie was a huge mainstream success, enough so that 2 sequels followed, showing the coming together of this familiar crew for the first mission in this timeline against Nero. The villain, played by Eric Bana, traveled back in time with a grudge match against Spock. His first action was to attack George Kirk's USS Kelvin, which the captain didn't survive, but his son did. James T. Kirk then took up the fight against Nero 20-odd years later when the villain attacked Vulcan. The big discrepancy here in the theatrical version is what Nero was doing for the 20 years between these 2 attacks. Why would he travel back in time only to wait around for 2 decades? Wouldn't it have been easier to travel back to when he was actually going to make his move? There is a very reasonable explanation here that the movie makes no attempts to explain, since the scene that did was left on the cutting room floor. After attacking George Kirk, Nero was confronted almost immediately by the Klingons, who captured the Romulan and kept him as their prisoner until he escaped over 20 years later. No plot holes here. Number 8. Bane's Mask, The Dark Knight Rises. Imagine going into a Batman movie as a villain and having to follow up the performance of Heath Ledger as the Joker. This was one of the most compelling on-screen portrayals in the entire comic book movie genre, though Tom Hardy still gave a damn good outing as Bane. The antagonist in the threequel was not without his flaws and criticisms, one of the main ones being that voice. We may all be used to it now, and there isn't a Batman fan alive who hasn't practiced their own Bane impression, but at the time it was almost impossible to understand. There was one flashback scene that teased what happened to Bane. The Brute fought off the prisoners in the pit while Talia made her escape, and she was overwhelmed. As unpleasant as this would have been for Bane, would it really have forced him into wearing such facial gear for the rest of his life? There was reportedly a scene that was ultimately cut from the movie that went into more detail about this reason, not only for the mask, but also for the waist belt and braces. This would have given that little bit more development to Bane, but still wouldn't have stopped him from being sidelined last minute for the awful Talia al Ghul. Number 7. Don't Look at the Ark, Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a great entry in the Indiana Jones franchise, and is just about as iconic as an 80s movie can get. Even 40 plus years later, the movie still holds up, as Harrison Ford's character is as relevant as ever. However, that is not to say that Raiders is perfect, particularly towards the end of the movie when Indy warns Marion not to look at the Ark itself. This information just seemed to come out of nowhere to save them just in the nick of time. It's not too unreasonable to think Dr. Jones may have picked up such knowledge in his day-to-day life, but this is flimsy at best. There's actually a scene originally in the script, but that was never filmed, that showed exactly how Indy came by such information. A scene that would have avoided the inevitable questions coming at the end of the movie when he just pulls it out of thin air. When Indiana and Sala visit Imam, he translates the headpiece to the Staff of Ra. There is also another translation that tells the 2 rules of the Ark. You don't look, and you don't touch. Quite why this was omitted is unclear, as it informs a pretty important moment in the overall story. Number 6. That Random Waitress, The Avengers. There was a lot going on in the Avengers back in 2012. Characters crossing over between franchises within the MCU is expected today, but 11 years ago, this was the most ambitious cinematic event ever. Among other things, the balance of screen time and character work had to be impeccable. For the most part, it's hard to find flaw with this. Each Avenger had a good amount of screen time, they each had their one-on-one with Loki, who was himself an exceptional villain, and even the humans of the piece weren't made to look out of place next to gods and monsters. But who was the seemingly random waitress that pulled focus in a few scenes during and after the Battle of New York? And why was she shown so much? No, it wasn't a huge amount of screen time, but it was enough to feel out of place, and without any kind of explanation or payoff. This would have come in a deleted scene that highlighted Cap's isolation and showed him speaking with the waitress before the battle ever began. Stan Lee even told him to ask for her number, but instead he went and joined the gym, only to save her life a few days later. Without the context of that scene, she is just another in the crowds that got a little more attention for seemingly no reason. Number 5. Sergeant William Candi, Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. Though there have been weaker movies in the franchise since its release in 2003, Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines was a huge step down from its two predecessors. Judging by the audience score of 46% on Rotten Tomatoes, most people would like to forget this one ever existed, but it could have been much worse. There is a scene that was thankfully left on the cutting room floor that, while it does answer some questions you may never have thought you had, just felt so out of place. The acting and premise of the whole thing are better left unseen. As something of an ad for the T-800, there is a little behind-the-scenes snippet that shows Sergeant William Candi on a treadmill, explaining that he has essentially been chosen as the base for the machine. Candy's southern accent, rumored to be Samuel L. Jackson's voice, that was dubbed over Arnie's actual voice was shot down, before another man in a suit with the T-800's usual drawl says that it can be fixed. So, that's how an American corporation came to produce a supposedly stealthy assassin with biceps the size of Bournemouth and an incredibly strong Austrian accent. Number 4. Lex Luthther meets Stephenwolf, Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice. It's not unfair to say that most people would agree Batman vs Superman sucked. Even in spite of a not terrible 63% on Rotten Tomatoes, the movie is still widely thought of as a poor addition to an overall poor, wider franchise. But what was the worst part of it? Now, this is something that could be debated for hours on end, but one aspect that is likely to be near the top of anyone's list is Lex Luthther. Taking creative license with a character is one thing, but what this film did with the villain was criminal, particularly in this scene. As Batman left the newly shaven Luther in his cell, the prisoner started rambling that the bell could not be unrung, and that he had found them. In the theatrical release, there was literally zero context, but there was a deleted scene that would have made more sense of it. It still would have been an awful scene, but at least audiences would have understood it. Luther could be seen conversing with an image of Steppenwolf, complete with 3 mother boxes, before disappearing at the sight of a SWAT team. No dialogue was spoken between them on screen, but paired with what did make the final cut, this would have made sense and acted as a proper setup to Justice League. Number 3. Luke builds his new lightsaber, Star Wars Episode 6: Return of the Jedi. A lightsaber is more than just a weapon to a Jedi. This is something that is incredibly personal to them, made from a kyber crystal that called only to them, with each color meaning something different. Luke Skywalker has been through some journey when it comes to his own lightsaber. His original saber was Anakin's, but was lost when Daddy Dearest chopped the poor lad's hand off on Bespin. This apparently magically found its way to Maz Kanata, who gave it to Rey, who gave it to Luke, who tossed it over his damn shoulder. These annoyances aside, it wasn't Luke's only lightsaber. Long before being handed the original sword by Rey on Arc 2, Luke used a green lightsaber during the events of Return of the Jedi, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and the flashback in The Last Jedi. But where did this new green saber come from? The answer was simple. Luke constructed a new weapon on Tatooine. It's just that it was never shown. This may have been because of the painfully corny calling to Luke by Vader, or it may have been something else. Either way, the questions hovering over the green lightsaber have probably been worth not hearing the greatest villain in cinematic history sound so dumb. Number 2. Pokemon Tears, Pokemon the First Movie. Quite recently, Ash Ketchum and Pikachu have bid farewell to their leading roles in the Pokemon anime series. This hit grown adults in the fields the world over, even those who haven't watched the show in potentially decades, as the iconic duo will no longer be at its forefront. Such is the power of nostalgia. One of the most iconic Pokemon moments of all time is the climactic battle between Mew and Mewtwo in the first movie. Mewtwo's speech about focusing on our similarities rather than our differences is incredibly poignant, and seemingly becomes more and more relevant as time goes by. But what about when Ash died? Yeah, Pikachu's best pal bit the dust and found himself turned to stone during the final fight. But it's okay, because 2 minutes later he was up and about just fine. This happened when Pikachu cried for his fallen trainer, which apparently made everything all better again. This was pure conjecture based on the events of the movie, as there was no explanation or context as to what was happening outside of an entire 10-minute opening sequence that didn't make the US cut of the movie. This included a line of dialogue that stated Pokemon's tears were filled with life. Still not a watertight explanation, granted, but it's better than nothing, right? Number 1. Ripley's connection to Newt, aliens. Though there is still a long way to go, Hollywood is finally embracing leading female protagonists more than ever before. However, before the likes of Black Widow, Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, Katniss Everdeen, or even Lara Croft, look no further than Ellen Ripley as the quintessential and pioneering female action hero. Sigourney Weaver's character is the epitome of a no-nonsense badass, but her story is also incredibly heartbreaking. She left her 10-year-old daughter to board the Nostromo, she was the lone survivor of the encounter with the Xenomorph, and she was then put into cryosleep for 57 years for the journey home. This means that she missed her daughter's entire life, something that was brought home in a devastating deleted scene. Ripley asked about her daughter, only to be told that she died 2 years earlier at the age of 66. Imagine having to hear that kind of news. It would crush absolutely anyone. Had this been left in, it would have informed why Ripley was so immediately protected of Newt in the sequel. This little survivor is as close to her own daughter as she was ever going to get again, and this scene shows why she went to such great lengths to protect her. Get away from her, you bitch.